Hi everybody, my name's Paul Murphy and I've got a passion for hats. Today I've got a repair in for me to do. It's one that's come through the website, and a very nice gentleman brought me over this hat, which I think he thought was a rabbit fur felt, but it's actually very, very light, and I suspect it's a beaver fur felt. It's a classic Trilby, it's one that he's had for a while, but unfortunately the liner's gone, the actual sweatband had just disintegrated, unfortunately, and I don't know whether you can see it, but the gross grain was black, and it's actually been in the sun, and the sun's actually gone away. So I've already given it a clean with the trusty tape and given it a good brush over, and then added a bit of steam to it. Just really wanted to see what the shape was going to be like when getting it back into almost like new condition. And as you can see, the brim's come up really nicely. If, to be fair, it was very much like that when it kicked off. The actual indentations are very nice. So this hat has obviously been made by a fairly good manufacturer, I suggest, and the front there just snaps down really nicely. I mean, this is a very nice hat. Unusually for a classic hat, it's a big one. It's a 7.5. So what we're going to do is we're going to put on a new sweatband, and then we're going to put new gross grain on the outside, and then we're going to see whether the gentleman's going to have a liner in the hat or not. But at the moment, those are the two things that we're going to get on and done. So on the point with the sweatband, what I normally do is turn the hat over so it's on its crown, and then you can probably see that I've got some gold inside here with writing on. So I tend to line it up with the front and the side, and then cut the sweatband to length. As you can see, the sweatbands are actually made so they're in a sort of semicircle. They go around a curve, if you like, and I buy them what's called reeded, which means that there's literally a reed of plastic that gives it the stiffness and helps when you actually put it and sew it to the hat. So I'm just trying to get the reed out so that I can actually cut the leather. So there we go. Look, we're pulling it. It's a clear plastic reed. So pop that on the side for a minute, and then let's pop this inside. So what I'm looking at is, here's the front of the crown, and so I'm going to line up the gold with that, and then come around the back. I've got roughly where that should be, which is probably around there, I think. Right, so the first thing I do is, it's always good to have a decent pair of scissors. These are dressmaker's scissors and tailor scissors. So you just then cut it to size there, and try and get it as square as you possibly can. Now that's not quite square, so I will just, there we are. The thing with this game is you get a lot of mess on the floor, so I'm forever vacuuming up. Now, if we pop that back in, then what that allows me to do is to, first of all, establish, if I were to cut that to that exact size, what would that be? So that's down to there. I'm going to get hold of some tailor's chalk. Tailor's chalk, there's a thing people don't use very often unless you're in the dressmaking game, do you? Anyway, I'm going to mark it very, very slightly. There we are. The reason is, I just want to measure it. So let's measure and see what that comes out at, and see whether we should be all right for making an exact leather sweatband for the gentleman. So there we go. and we're measuring it around on the curve. So I'm just extending the dressmaker's tape measure every couple of inches throughout. And yeah, okay. So what that measures 61 centimeters, and the gentleman's head is just over 60 and a half. So we should be all right. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do is measure 60 and a half. Well, actually between the two, 60 and 3/4 probably. Let's have a look. And 3/4. Here we are. Going to go to about there. There we go. So that's now been cut off, and what I'll do then is just offer it up again in here. Just see how we're doing. And yeah, that will fit down here perfectly. Now I'm a 60 and a bit, so let's just see if this, see when you fit that like that, it sometimes will stay in on its own without any banding in it, any of the reed. So let's just take my hat off very quickly and pop this on. Yeah, I'd say that's probably, yeah, that's going to be all right. Okay, so I'm going to take that down just a smidgen, I think. The thing I do with all this is measure and measure again. That's the thing. And measure and measure again. You can't do it enough really, so you don't get it wrong. Where are we? Right, yeah, let's take a slight amount off there. There we go. Right, now with that being cut, and that will fit in there nicely, what I then do is I put the reed. Remember I took that out. I'm now going to pop it back in and then cut the excess reed off. So it just feeds nicely down the hole, all the way down. And all you're waiting for is for it to pop out the other end. And then, oh, there we are. So just have a little tiny bit poking out that end. And I'll show you for why in a moment. And a little bit more at this end. Okay, there we are. Right, so that's now got rid of the excess. So I'm just going to get rid of this rubbish that I've got here, because I hate working in an area of rubbish. And what we then do is we use these little ferrules, and I'm not sure you'll be able to see this on camera, but these are little tiny links that go in both sides of the sweatband on the reed. So you pull the reed out, pop that on the end, and then using a specialist pair of pliers, you just crimp it. So all we're doing is just crimping it so that it grips, and then feeding that back into the channel that the reed goes down. There we go. That's it. And then bringing this round the other side and then doing the same in that side. Now the thing being that if you've got a bit of excess reed, that will then help it to be under pressure when you're actually connecting that up. Here we go. There, lovely. Now, once that's been connected up, you obviously have to do the stitching on the machine, which is in another room, so I'll go off and do that in just a moment, and then put a traditional bow, which is something that is a nice touch on the back. So I'll go off and do that and bring it back and show you shortly. So there we are, one sweatband, nicely stitched with a nice little bow there. Now on the back here, what I tend to do, and a lot of makers do, is actually put some tape. So I use this wonderful thing called Gorilla or gaffer tape, and quite simply, just with a Stanley knife blade, I cut a slice. Oop. And there we go. And then, so there we are, just a little square. Pop it on the back here, and that takes up some of the strain, if there is any strain. If somebody's putting it on that's a little bit bigger than the actual sweatband, but that gives a nice finish on there. So this will now sit in very nicely into the hat here. I'll line it up before I do anything else, but as you can probably see, that's now gone in there, a real treat. So we're going to be taking it down so that the level is with the reed just slightly above the crease. And the reason why that is, and I know when you take your hat off, you need to put your hat down on the crown, not this way. But if you put it down that way and you've got the reed poking up very slightly, then it will give a little bit of protection to the brim. But look, what I say to people is, if you buy one of my hats, you'll get a hat box with it. Put the hat back in the box when you're not wearing it, and then it will be protected. So now, what do we do next? Well, I have to sew that sweatband onto the hat. But first of all, I've got to take the gross grain off and clean all of that up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a basting stitch, which is basically going around and hand stitching the sweatband onto the actual hat so that you get the position correct. And then I'll go on the machine and run it around with the machine, and then take the basting stitch off so you get a really nice finish with the sweatband in the right place with no gaps and everything else. So that will be my next step. And then once that's done, then we'll be making the gross grain out of the beautiful gross grain Petersham that I buy in the UK to replace the one that's on there. So we're at a point now where I've taken off the bow, and I've taken off the gross grain, and what you can see is that it has lost a lot of colour due to the sun, primarily. Probably been left on the back of a car window or something. But interestingly enough, the actual band is put on first, and then the bow is put on second, and slightly different way to the way that I would normally put a band on myself. Anyway, what we do now is tweezers, and you can see this, but there's lots of little bits of cotton that have attached the gross grain to the hat. So I'm going to go around and pick out that cotton before I go any further. So I've now picked out all the pieces of cotton that were around the crown here, and there's a little bit of shading where the actual gross grain has been on to the felt, and the felt's been exposed, etc. So what I'm doing now, I've given it a little bit of a brush, so a stiff brush, go around the outside just to bring the nap round. But to do it even better, I'm going to put a bit of steam on it, and then that will lift the pile and help it a little bit. So we just give it a bit of light steaming, basically. So that will just ease up the pile and help get rid of that little bit of a line, and it is only a little bit of a line, to be fair. I'm not sure if you can even see it on camera. And also, I think with the new gross grain that I put on there, you won't see it. So now, that having been done, the next job is to take the sweatband that I prepared earlier, put it inside of the hat, and then use the pins that I've got here to pin the band to the hat. So there we are, I've pinned the sweatband inside of the hat. You can probably just about see it there. And they're spaced about every 2 or 3 inches. Now, the one thing I'd say when you're doing a basting stitch onto the hat is don't skimp, well, in fact, whenever you're making a hat, don't skimp on the cotton. I use Gutterman's, which is a sort of industry standard. And to do this is about a 60 and a half centimetre circumference. And I usually pull off a good sort of 2 meters, and you'd be surprised how much of the 2 meters that sewing round there actually uses. You're usually left with a good sort of I don't know, I suppose about 30-40 centimeters at the end of it, but it certainly takes quite a lot. So I'm now going to stitch manually. About each stitch will be probably about 1 centimeter wide, and that will keep it in place without the pin, so I can go on to the sewing machine and actually sew it to the hat. So I've been up and gone round the hat and stitched the actual sweatband to the felt itself. I don't know whether you can just see the line, but there's a very fine line, size 4 stitch it is all the way around, nicely tensioned so that it looks very smart, and actually it's stiffened up the hat no end, because of course it's given it some rigidity from the other sweatband. And I mean, look at that, it's just a beautiful little hat, isn't it? I mean, it's a great find. I don't actually recall whether the gentleman actually bought this or had it handed down to him in the family or what, but this is going to turn out to be quite a nice hat. I'm really pleased with how it's coming along. So I'm going to get on and do the gross grain now and actually form the bow. And I'm going to go for a slightly more modern sort of setup than was on the hat before. So where can I show? I'm wearing one. Hang on, look. I don't know whether you can see it, but on mine here, there's a double layer there, and they only had a single layer, and also a double layer back there. And the reason they keep it to the one is use less material. I actually believe that I like to make things that are of high quality, and for me quality is all about using the right materials, the best materials where you can find, and doing things the right way, so not skimping. And in fact, to me, this is the sort of epitome of how a bow should look. So that's what I'm going to put on here, and I'll take a few videos part way through and come back to you and show you what I do. I've managed to get the same width Petersham gross grain as was on the hat, and so that means that not only the band itself, which is here, but also the bow could be created in the same dimensions. So what I normally do is measure up the bow just to see how wide it is. Mine normally about 13, so let's have a look. This is 12. Excuse me. So I think what we'll do is about 11 and a half. I think what we'll do is we'll make a bow for about 12 and a half centimeters, and I think that's probably going to be the right sort of proportions for this hat. So I normally make a bow in 2 pieces, but the first piece is the one with all the bow bit on it. So what do? I fold it over. In fact, I've done a video on this already, but I'll just run through it. Fold it over to approximately 6 centimeters, which is what we've got there. Just over. Okay. And then fold over again to make the second part of the bow, and that's a little bit longer, probably about half a centimetre longer. There we go, can you see that? Yeah. Then what I do is fold the other part, which is normally about a further 6 centimetres. So let's just see. It's funny how you start doing these things and you do them over and over again, and you sort of get a real eye for the measurements. So that's a 13 centimetre bow now, which is absolutely perfect, I think, for this. And then we'll go down there again and then back again like that. So now we've got it all folded up. Whoops, all folded up in the middle there. So I'm going to go to the sewing machine and just sew it up there, and then what I'm going to do is sew the piece to go around the middle and put it on. Right, I'm going to go and do that and then come back and show you how it looks. Right, so there we are, one lovely bow already made up. So then what do we do? Well, having got the hat on one of my blocks, what we're going to do is we're going to offer up the bow, and we're going to roughly measure it and then cut it. So I'm going to cut the excess off here. There we go. Right, lovely. Now I always roll up the remainder of the roll before working on the hat. And the reason is that inevitably, where I work in a small space, I'm going to have something over, or I'm going to damage the gros grain. And you can imagine it's not cheap, so we want to be able to look after it. So bear with me a second. Okay, there we go. So already you're starting to see a beautiful hat come together. How good is that? So now what I've got to do is to actually pin this and the gros grain to the actual crown of the hat, and then sew it manually all the way around. So what you do is, very first thing is to bend back the leather that you've got in the way of a sweatband, and it comes off around like this really quite easily. But it's quite stiff leather actually, but can you see that? There we are. It's like a bit of a lip. Now I'm going to just, on this hat, I'm going to take the brim down a bit. I'll steam it all when I come to the end of doing the job anyway. But this job is going to take, what, 2.5 hours, maybe a little bit more, something like that, to do the whole job. So it's touch and go as to how economical it is to actually do something like this. But you know what? This is such a nice hat. When it's actually done, if this was my hat, it would sell for good money. So I think it's a really good idea that the client has actually decided to have it done. So I'm going to put that there, and then I'm going to put the pins on my trusty holder over here. That's not what I wanted. And I'll come back once I've actually pinned it up, and I'll show you how it looks. If you've got a passion for hats, keep watching the channel. Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.